I think we should be live. If anyone is already watching and you want to let me know in the live chat on YouTube or LinkedIn that you can see and hear me, it's always great to know, just double checking. Make sure my settings are good. Also, let us know in the chat how you're doing. Maybe a little bit about what you're working on as well, if you want to share. Are you building something with a large language model right now? Do you already have something in production? Let us know in the chat. It's always really fun to hear a little bit more about the audience, and for you as the audience too. I think it's usually a little bit more fun hearing about what other people attending the workshop are also working on. Several people said yes, they can. Awesome. Thank you for letting me know. We'll get going here in just a minute. So again, as people are joining in, let us know in the chat. Maybe a fun thing to share is where you're watching from. Is always kind of fun to see as well. So make sure you say hello, include where you're watching from, and if you want to share about what you're working on. I'm assuming a lot of people here are at least interested in large language models. Definitely share in the chat kind of what you want to build. Someone said they have some prototypes in place, working on productionalizing them. Awesome. Do you have any favorite deployment tools right now for LLMs? Or I know you could still be looking around because you're still working on it as well. Someone said learning more about vector databases. Awesome. I've actually been working on an example using LangKit, one of the libraries we're going to see today for monitoring, with a vector database as well. Which vector database are you working with? Because there's obviously a lot of cool stuff, as you probably know already, that you can do with large language models and vector databases. They said DeepSeed. Awesome. I don't think I've worked on, or DeepSpeed. I personally haven't used that one yet. I've used Facebook's and Milvus, I think. And I've looked a little bit at Pinecone. I'll have to check that one out. Someone said, watching from New York. Welcome. I'm actually going to go visit New York in a month, I think, from now, or a little over a month, which I'm excited because, weirdly enough, I haven't been to New York yet. I've been around to a lot of other cities. For some reason, I have not made it over there. Someone said Milvus. They said, which one are we seeing today? I think you're referring to vector databases. So we're going to be using Hugging Face today for the transformer library. But part of this workshop doesn't have the vector database built into it. But if we have time at the end, I could show an example maybe I'm working on using Facebook's. Or I can share it with you later. Someone said Pinecone. Someone that said they're also watching in New York. All right, so I think we'll wait just a few more seconds or a minute before we get going. I know people are still rolling in. There'll be time for people to keep rolling in as we start going through. And just a few links I'll share while people are still joining. And I'll go through this a little bit later as well when we get to the actual setup piece. The only thing you're probably really going to need to do to set up in order to run the hands-on examples today is probably create this free WhyLabs account, unless you already have one. Otherwise, we're going to be using Google Colab to actually run all of our code. And I'm assuming most people already have a Google account. So probably the only real piece of setup that will take a few seconds to do is creating that free account there. And then also share, we're going to be using LangKit today, which is a toolkit for extracting metrics around large language models. And then we're going to be using this Google Colab notebook. So I'll go ahead and share it in the chat right now. Don't worry too much about opening it up. We'll go through that when we get to kind of the setup piece as well. And then also, I'll share this link for a Slack group. If you want to join that Slack group, it's going to be a good place to stay connected after the workshop. I'm not going to be looking in there during the workshop. So if you have questions, definitely keep them in the YouTube live chat or the LinkedIn live chat, and I'll do my best to answer them as they come through. And then we're also going to be using Hugging Face. Many people might already be familiar with them. I'll share a link to their main website as well. and we're going to be using specifically the Hugging Face Transformers library, as well as a Gradio to build a little bit of a UI around a chatbot for kind of an instance that we're going to see around it. But Hugging Face does a lot more. They have spaces and data sets and models hosted on their website. You're probably already a little familiar with them. And I'm going to just share a couple of these links real quick in the YouTube live chat as well, because I don't think they went over there. And then we will be ready to roll. So I'll just share this and this link again. And again, for everyone who just joined, I saw quite a few more people come in. Say hello in the live chat on YouTube or LinkedIn. And if you want to put where you're watching from, that's always really fun to hear. And then also, if you want to put a little bit about why you're interested in large language models, that's also excellent to hear as well. All right. So today we're going to be talking about monitoring large language models in production, and we're going to be using Hugging Face and LangKit. So like I mentioned, again, I know people just rolled in, so I'm going to repeat it. Hugging Face is a really popular library that contains transformers and in many pre-trained models that you can take and use kind of right away or fine tune. LangKit is a library that allows you to extract metrics from large language models, and we can use those metrics to monitor them over time for like prompt engineering changes, security issues. We'll be talking more about that in a second, and we'll also mainly be seeing this hands-on today. So there's just a little bit of slides, and then a lot of this is going to be me actually showing code in a Colab notebook that you can either watch or that you can follow along. Hopefully a lot of you will follow along. And like I mentioned, the only setup piece you'll probably really need to do, it'll take a minute, is just setting up that free WhyLabs account. Otherwise, you just need a Google account for Google Colab, and we should be good to go. So agenda again, real quick. We're just going to do a quick introduction. We're going to talk about setup, which again is very simple today. We'll just go through a few slides talking about large language models a little bit and ML monitoring and some common pain points, a little bit about LangKit. And then again, most of this is going to be a hands-on example today. So hopefully a lot of people will want to follow along, but you're also more than welcome to just watch me as well. And keep talking in the chat. Again, I will do my best to see everything in there, and sometimes it gets really busy. I might miss something, so feel free to ask it again later or follow up with me separately in Slack or on LinkedIn. So I'm Sage Elliott. I'm a machine learning and MLOps evangelist at WhyLabs. Previously, I've done a lot of stuff around computer vision in production and on edge devices. And at WhyLabs, we create tools to enable AI observability and ML monitoring. So hopefully we can detect, issues faster with your ML models in production. And then specifically today, we're going to be talking about large language models, which they're a little bit different to monitor. And there's a lot of cool stuff you can do around when you're kind of researching or developing the model in the first place, especially around like prompt engineering, which is really popular right now. And for over a decade now, which I always feel old when I say this, I've worked in software or hardware, mainly with startups and sometimes agencies around Seattle and Melbourne, Florida, which I saw several people said they're here from Florida. So kind of fun. I think I saw someone said they were here from St. Petersburg. I've gone there. Obviously, Melbourne is not too far away. Melbourne's like an hour south of Orlando on the East Coast. And in general, I just love making things with technology. So I'm always playing around with something new. Lately, it's been a lot around large language models, like probably a lot of other people. And if you want to stay connected, definitely feel free to stay connected with me on LinkedIn. And then also there is the Slack channel as well. All right, so about you, say hello in the chat, and where are you watching from? Why are you building large language models? And what types of models would you like to see in a workshop next? So today, again, we're going to be using Hugging Face, which there's a lot of models you can use with the Hugging Face library. And then, again, if you want to stay connected, feel free to join this Slack channel. Someone said they're watching from London. Awesome. Another person's from Florida. Someone said DC. Very cool. All right. So again, setup. The only thing you'll probably want to do is create this free account. And if you want to give us a GitHub star or a star in our GitHub repos, we always appreciate it for our open source work. So we have two libraries, LangKit, which we're going to be using today, built on top of another library called WhyLabs, which can be used for logging data or kind of any ML model of any kind, and extracting AI telemetry from other types of models. And LangKit's built on top of it. And the way it kind of works, we'll talk a little bit more about this probably later, and it'll make sense when you see what the profiles look like, is the way it works is YLogs only collects statistical summaries of your data, so no raw data is really in there anymore. And we use these really lightweight profiles that are incredibly privacy preserving as well to monitor statistics around your data and ML models in production. So it's really cool and very useful in a lot of industries where privacy is a really high priority. You can use it in any industry, but specifically around like fintech and healthcare, there's a lot of cool work that we've done there to work in those industries. So again, if you want to give any of those GitHub repos a star, we always really appreciate it as well. A lot more people are saying where they're watching from. Very exciting. This is why I love doing virtual events as well. Like in person, I always enjoy as well, but virtual is just so cool to see where everyone is watching from. All right, so real quick, what is ML monitoring? Has anyone used ML monitoring before on any type of model or data in production? That you might have heard these terms before, like data drift or data quality monitoring, where you're looking at distributions of your input data to the model, usually compared to maybe the distribution of your training data set for your model. And when that gets too different than the training data set, chances are your model's not going to be performing as well on that new data coming in. So we have a saying here, bad data happens to good models. You can do as much evaluation as you want and testing on your models, but once you put it in production, chances are your data is going to change in some way or have some sort of quality issue down the line. And hopefully with ML monitoring, you'll catch that really fast. And AI observability kind of allows you to usually, once you have an alert triggered or something with monitoring, to drill down faster and kind of troubleshoot why that happened in your model. Has anyone used anything like for ML monitoring before? Or maybe you've experienced data drift or data quality issues once you put a model in production? I'm guessing that if you've put a model in production and had it there for a while, you have experienced something like this in the past. But it's a little bit different for a large language model. So if you have been playing around with them, you probably know, it's not clear cut, usually getting like, was this model accurate or not? It's generating, responses based on prompts. There's a lot of interesting use cases people are using them for right now. Like you've probably seen, agents where it has access to tools to do specific tasks or develop tasks. Or develop new tools even. Chatbots, everyone's probably used ChatGPT here, I'm guessing, or something similar. Summarization's a big one right now, summarizing documents and providing useful insights, as well as Q&A on some sort of documentation. And again, so here I'm just listing out, these are several of the big LLMs at this point, and we're going to be using Hugging Face today. Has anyone used all of these or any of these? Let me know in the chat, or if you've used any of them, what's been your favorite so far? Are most people using OpenAI and their API? Are people using Hugging Face and their models or fine-tuning them? And then this was Dolly, which I think now Databricks is probably focused a little bit more on Mosaic ML. But if you're using any models, let me know in the chat what you're using. It's always kind of interesting to see what people are using in production or just for experimentation. Someone said most experience with OpenAI models. Yeah, I'm guessing a lot of people are probably using OpenAI because they do a really good job of making it easy, just interacting with their API. I love it. When I've been doing a little bit more on like fine tuning or something, I might pick up a Hugging Face model. But I know that I think fine tuning just came out the other week for GPT 3.5, which is exciting. So what are some common pain points with LLMs? And again, let me know in the chat, or let us all know in the chat, what pain points you've experienced with large language models. Again, whether that's just you playing around with it, researching it, or if you've actually put in production. It's always interesting to hear maybe some pain points that people have experienced. So you have hallucinations. That could be irrelevant or inaccurate responses. Response shows different experience than you wanted. prompt engineering. So this is really interesting. Almost everyone here, probably if you're developing an application and using OpenAI, API, Hugging Face, etc., you're probably giving it some sort of system prompt, right? You're telling the model kind of how to behave and what you're expecting it to output. And if you're doing this, you're probably changing this prompt over time. At least most people that I've talked to using LLMs in production, they start with a system prompt and then they kind of, okay, we want to make this better. We'll shift it. We'll change it over time. And when I ask them how they know it's better, a lot of times it's kind of a little bit of a kind of like a gut check on it. Or they might sporadically go in and test a few prompts and see how it's responding, or maybe they have a set of prompts, but they don't know how it's really doing over time, which I think is pretty interesting. Has anyone done an interesting experiment around like changing your system prompt and seeing how your model behaves? And if so, how are you kind of tracking that over time? It's usually kind of hard. And also, most people I talk to are just doing like one at a time. Whereas like maybe, again, we'll see this in action later today, but we'll see how you could potentially do like 10 different system prompts and monitor them over like a week's worth of time or whatever you think is a good time for you, and select the best one out of those 10 prompts, which I think is probably how it's going to go a little bit more in the future. Because also doing prompt engineering is pretty cheap. You're not, retraining a whole model the entire time to increase the behavior you want. Then we have output validation. So I don't know. I've had some issues with LLMs in the past outputting stuff that I was not expecting. And again, I'm sure if you've built some sort of application, you've seen this as well. Like I've used OpenAI or a Hugging Face model, and I'll have it, ask it a question like, hey, I'm not happy with this product or something like that in a chatbot. And it'll spit back like a phone number, even though I never gave it a phone number to provide, which one could be bad for if someone actually has that phone number, or if the customer using that chatbot thinks it's a real phone number and they call me and it's a fake one. They're not going to be very happy with that. There's also a lot of kind of security issues potentially around like leaking. So if that was a real phone number, or if people are trying to kind of hack your LLM to get something like a credit card information or health data, you might want to be monitoring for specific patterns around there. Someone said, for sure, they've iteratively tuned the prompt to reduce hallucinations, but not really in any consistent or standardized way. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I mean, part of why it's so fun to be in this field right now is because like everyone's experimenting and figuring out the best way to do this, which is really exciting. So, it sounds like, other people have experienced these issues before. I know from talking to a lot of people in the field that, these are pretty common issues across all LLMs right now. So we made LangKit, the library I talked about. It's open source. I shared it in the chat before. I'll share it again in a little bit. But LangKit can extract metrics that you can use to kind of prevent or monitor all these situations. So we have things like guardrails. So you can set up a guardrail, monitor for, prompt jailbreaks or pattern matching. So like, it's outputting a category of medical advice, and maybe your chatbot is a tax chatbot and should not be giving medical advice. That has pattern matching for things like credit card, like I mentioned, or any other type of data you want to have a pattern in there for. You can compare user prompts over time. You can compare prompt engineering. So if you create a system prompt, again, you can actually create multiple models, like we'll see this later, and how you can monitor, multiple of those over time, and then select the best one over like a week's worth of data or over a set of golden prompts. You could also compare models. So if you are fine tuning, or I know people will also start with like OpenAI, start collecting their production data, start training their own LLM, and then at a certain point when it maybe gets better on those responses you want, then you could deploy that. And then also just kind of observing usage over time, like sentiment of your responses, but also maybe your prompts. If your users are getting more angry at your chatbot, maybe that's not a good sign. And just a whole bunch of statistics around LLM. So we'll see this in action in a second. But just to give you a little bit of an idea how this works, you get a prompt. We extract some metrics like a sentiment score, jailbreak similarity, toxicity, reading level, etc. We have about, I think it's like 16 for prompts and response, and then another one that is prompt relevance on responses. And then you get your response and extract similar metrics as well as relevance to prompt. So it's really easy to use. You just pip install it in any Python environment. And then this little example is actually using a callback that's built into LangChain. So you can use this in LangChain, Llama Index, kind of whatever your stack is. Really, as long as you can get a prompt and a response in like a dictionary format or a data frame, you'll be able to log it and extract all those metrics that I kind of talked about. And then you monitor it over time. And in this case, this is the prompt sentiment, and you could see at some point, in this case, it actually went up. That could be a good sign that our prompts got more positive. But you can monitor all those kind of metrics that we briefly saw for text quality, security, et cetera, over time, and then set up a monitor. So when it does change a lot or meet a certain threshold, it can trigger an alert. So you go look at it. So that could be like an email or a Slack, but it could also trigger a workflow. So if you actually do want to automate something in your MLOps pipeline, you can trigger a workflow as well. And just to give you a little high level view of what this looks like, again, you have your prompts, goes into any large language model. Today, we're going to be using Hugging Face. Get your response, whatever that is, and monitor for those things we talked about. It's open source. It has a fair amount of integrations with popular other tools, but it's also really easy to integrate, again, in almost any Python environment and tool that you're working with. You'll probably be able to make it work. And it's also very extendable. So you can write custom metrics, which I'll show a little bit later as well. So, again, we have these out-of-the-box metrics we'll mostly be using today. But if you want to add any custom metrics, you can do so. And that could also be with querying your vector database, like someone was talking about earlier. So you could query it for your own set of jailbreaks or something like that, and return, a distance value there or a label attached with that, and then do something with that, whether that's directly in your Python environment or with WhyLabs. And we'll see both of those in action today. So again, your MLOps pipeline might look something like this. You're making your predictions. You have your privacy preserving data statistics, and then you have some sort of platform that you're probably aggregating those statistics to, and then setting things up like monitors or visualizations there, and then triggering workflows, gaining insights, or having alerts and notifications. So that was enough slides. Let's go ahead and do the hands-on part. And again, you'll probably just want to create this free WhyLabs account for part of what we're going to do today. And then there's this Colab notebook that you're going to want to open up. And again, I assume most people have a Google account. And I'll pause for a second if anyone has any questions so far. And then let me know when you open that up. And if someone wants to let me know they can get to a page that looks like this, that would be great. And then go to File, save a copy in Drive when you do reach there. And then you'll have your very own copy of this. So you can bookmark the original link. Don't worry about messing anything up here. Feel free to change code, test it out. You can always go back to that original link. Someone said, is LangKit or an alternative available if our system is mostly in JavaScript right now? Good question. I don't know of another one in JavaScript. I know we are working on a way to make it easier to kind of port WhyLogs, which again is kind of the backbone of LangKit here, to some other languages. I'm not sure what the status of that is right now. And if anyone else watching from WhyLabs, if anyone is here and they want to put something in the chat, they can. Otherwise, you might have to save your data into Python somewhere if you want to use LangKit, and then extract those metrics and tie back to your JavaScript app. I'd also love to just know more about what the JavaScript stack looks like in general. For LLMs right now. That isn't something I've played with. It's mostly been Python. That's pretty interesting to me. All right, so I have this notebook. I have my own copy that I saved over here. Oops. Trying to zoom in. Just to make sure. Is this good enough for everyone to see? All right, so top here contains a little bit more about LangKit and the out-of-the-box metrics. So if you want to click in here, this goes more to the documentation. So you can read these more in depth. I'm just going to be kind of showing you it as we go. I hope that's okay with everyone. And all right, so I'm just going to go ahead and scroll down. All right, everyone, create a copy in your Drive if you haven't already. We have some other links, again, to GitHub. Give us a star if you like the work we're doing. And then also the Slack channel where you can ask questions after the workshop. There. So if you've never used Google Colab before, it's essentially Google's way of hosting a Jupyter notebook, which is a popular tool in data science and machine learning, where you can write code, documentation and output visualizations all in one place. And you can run these code cells by either hitting this play button off to the left, or you can hit Shift Enter, which is usually what I do. So when it's highlighted, Shift Enter will run it and then kind of move you to the next cell. So here we ran our first one. We have Hello World. It kind of initialized a whole little instance for us here. And on this next cell, let's go ahead and pip install a couple things into our Python environment. So we're going to use transformers. Again, this is the Hugging Face, the really popular Hugging Face transformers library. We're going to install Gradio, which is also maintained by Hugging Face now, which allows you to add some graphical elements to your machine learning models very easily. We'll see what this looks like in an LLM for an LLM in a second. And then we're going to pip install LangKit as well. So this will take probably just a minute or less than a minute. Is everyone able to make a copy that wanted to make a copy to start following along? I will assume yes, if that's the case, or if no one's answered yet. Has anyone built any fun large language models recently, or any fun applications you want to talk about? Also, let us know in the chat, or let me know in the chat. All right, so everything just pip installed for us. And now let's move on to the next code cells. So here, we're going to go take a quick look at what these metrics look like in LangKit. And then we're going to go in and kind of build a little bit more of an exciting application with an actual LLM here. But first, let's go ahead and just import LLM metrics from LangKit. And then we're going to import WhyLabs as Y. Then we're going to declare or initialize this WhyLabs anonymous session. This makes it really easy for us to profile our data, but then also quickly view it in WhyLabs, kind of remotely on the platform. And this is just a good way to kind of get a feel of what our data is going to look like. And then we'll go in and actually build like a function with a large language model and then pass in new data, and it'll get a little bit more exciting. The first time you run this LLM metrics init, it can take a few seconds as well because there's some lightweight models behind the scenes that classify things like sentiment, etc. So those will download the first time. Once you do this once in your environment, then you don't have to do this every time. And then in the next cell, we're going to port some kind of some pre-made prompts and responses here. And then we're going to log those again, just so we can kind of see what this telemetry looks like. And then we'll be using it in models, and you'll see how to bring it into your own models very quickly after this. So we'll load in those pre-made kind of chats that are, again, our prompts and responses. And then we're calling y.log. We're passing in those chats. In this case, the chats, if you scroll down, you can actually see what they look like. They're in a data frame format. So we have a prompt over here, and then the response to those prompts, so like hello world, etc. And then we're going to log all these, extract those different metrics about them. And so we pass that in as a data frame, but this could also be a dictionary. I tend to work actually in dictionary formats when I'm using a large language model. We're giving it a name here, and then we're passing in that schema that we initialize. So that schema is right now using the out-of-the-box metrics by default when we just initialize the LLM metrics from LangKit. But again, you can add your own custom metrics just with a decorator, which I'll show an example. I'll share a blog post about it later. And then you would just initialize that schema again, and it'll add that custom metric to it. And in this case, we're creating a reference profile. So we can go ahead and click on this link that was generated. And we'll also see what this looks like locally in our environment in a second. But right now, what this did is it logged the chats, extracted those metrics out of it. And then because we did this init anonymous session type, we can also go ahead and quickly view our data in the WhyLabs platform. You can go ahead and click out of this, or you can click and take the little tour. But here we can see that we have some data around our prompts. So these are all the different metric types like I was talking about, where you have metrics extracted from prompts and responses. So for example, we can just pick one. Let's get this sentiment one that has a little bit of a distribution. We can click view details. Here you can kind of see the values of all the different prompts that we logged of the prompt sentiment over time and kind of where the average is. Something that's really exciting, I think, is this Show Insights button. So here, just from those prompts, and again, you can go look at those chats and kind of maybe figure out why they might have done some of these things. We're catching some patterns. Again, these are just out of the box metrics, so you could add your own for specific like health data that you want to catch or anything like that. But we can see that it says, hey, 2 patterns in prompts matches including email address. So that could be important. Maybe, maybe not. That might be more important if we want to monitor this on response, which again, it automatically does. But in this case, we're understanding that someone is prompting and providing their email address. It looks like also there's a prompt score very high for jailbreak similarity. So someone actually might be trying to jailbreak our large language model, sentiment, etc. And then let's look at some responses. The response has 4 pattern matches, including credit card number. So in this case, our large language model is kind of giving out a credit card number, which again, probably isn't what we want to do. Maybe it is if you're doing some bank robot or something like that, giving you a credit card number. But probably a lot of applications don't want this. And again, I've actually had this not with a credit card, but with a phone number in a real world scenario for something I was working on. So again, like just getting these kind of insights very quickly out of the box can hopefully give you some data around your model, especially if you have a ton of prompts. You can't always sift through everything, and quickly kind of getting these insights could be very useful. Someone said, what is a jailbreak? Great question. Yeah, so if you're not familiar, jailbreaks in large language models are typically when someone tries to get your large language model to do something it's not supposed to do. So for example, if you're using ChatGPT and you ask it to do something really negative, like create malware or something like that, it's going to say, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm not designed for this. It's not good. And there's ways of usually trying to get around that. So it's a big field right now, people researching how to get around these kind of guardrails people put into their models. And one common way is like, using different languages or ciphers or something like that and getting around it. It's very interesting. I think that's going to be a big field, is just like security for LLMs in the future. Just like how, cybersecurity and security for all these other applications are really big now. Doing it for large language models, I think, is definitely going to be a big career in the future. And other people are adding good comments in the chat. So I liked the prompt injection as one way of that. Removing instructions. Simply, it is an act of removing software restrictions. All right, so let's move on and get into something a little bit more interesting. Does this already seem interesting, though? We're extracting these metrics. We kind of saw what they looked like in the platform here. We see that just with those metrics and not including the whole prompts and responses and none of that real raw data, we're able to extract a lot of information about the prompts and responses. All right, so let's go ahead and let's build a little GPT function here. And we're going to go ahead and import transformers from transformers. We're going to import GPT-2. The reason why we're using GPT-2 today is because we're just running on a CPU right now in Colab, and GPT-2 can actually run just in a few seconds and get a response to our prompt. But I just want to be very clear. You can use what we're doing right now with really any model that you can import into transformers or that comes with it. So for example, you could install the latest version of Llama 2 and just do it this way. So in this case, we're using just like a model that comes in the library. It's very easy to download for us. It's very easy to run on limited hardware here. But you can do exactly what we're doing today with any of those other models. So like Llama 2, I think a new version of Falcon just came out today as well, right? All right, so now we're going to go ahead and create a function here. We're just going to call it GPT model. It's going to just take a prompt in. We're going to get the tokenizer for it from our model, our GPT model. Then we're going to give it a max length, temperature, some settings around our GPT model. So if you didn't know, temperature, having this higher usually makes your model a little bit more creative. GPT-2, as we'll see today, is not as nearly as good as 3.5 or 4. Sometimes it gives kind of wild responses, but it definitely was really cool at the time. And again, we're running this because it's pretty lightweight for us. Here, we're getting a response. We're decoding the tokenizer. And then this is the part for WhyLabs and WhyLogs. Basically, again, if you can get the prompt and response into dictionary format like this, you can extract all those metrics that we saw. And I'll also just say you don't always have to do the prompt and response. You could just do one or the other as well. But most of the times, you're probably going to be monitoring a prompt and a response, unless, as we'll see a little bit later, we'll set up a guardrail locally in our environment with this, and you'll be able to look at the prompt and if it's too toxic, maybe you don't want to pass it over to your model at all because you don't want it to jailbreak something potentially. I think I ran that. And then here, we'll pass in this text and we'll get a prompt and response dictionary from this. And again, this is GPT-2, so it won't be quite as cool as 3.5, but we'll be able to run it in just a few seconds. So I said, tell me a story about a cute dog. And then it just gives us this kind of little bit of a nonsense story. We won't worry too much about the response in this case. So let's go ahead and look at how we can extract metrics from this. So again, we'll import LLM metrics from LangKit. WhyLabs is Y, and then pandas. And then we're just going to set this pandas data frame. So that's going to display the entire data frame. And then we'll create a profile. So this is where it's going to extract all those metrics that we saw before. We're going to pass in that prompt and response dictionary that we had created. And then we passed in our language schema as well. And also, just a quick note, this is just a tiny little bug here. Because when we initialize that anonymous sessions, it's going to say this when we call that y.log and we don't give it a name. Just ignore it for now. That will go away very soon, hopefully next time you come back and run this notebook. But when it says skipping upload, we're not even trying to upload right now, but don't worry about this text for the remainder of the workshop. And if you did reset your runtime and just ran this section, without doing that initializing anonymous session, you won't get this text. So now that we profiled our data, let's see what's actually in there. So this is what a profile looks like from LangKit now. We have all those metrics that we kind of saw in the WhyLabs platform before. So we have things like aggregate reading level. I'm not going to read every single one of these out loud. Has patterns, jailbreak similarity, letter count, sentence count, sentiment. And again, you can tell these are all on the prompt because they start with a prompt here. And then we have all the ones on the response. So most of them are very similar here. And then we also try to calculate relevance to prompt based on embeddings. But you can also bring your own metric in, which is really important. So a lot of people I talk to building LLMs, they are trying to come up with really good metrics of what determines a good large language model in their specific application. And I think a lot of these out-of-the-box metrics are really useful for measuring things like this. But if you do have a different metric you want to bring in here, it's very easy to create a user-defined function that can really extract any metric and then log it in a similar way to this. And if you scroll over, you'll see that each one of these columns contain things like the cardinality, so how many unique values are in that specific row. Counts. In this case, we just profiled one prompt and response, but these profiles are also mergeable. So we can profile a whole bunch of prompts and responses at the same time, merge them together, and not lose any fidelity of these statistics that we extract. And then again, this is the same for WhyLabs as well if you're using on different data types. So if you're using on tabular data or computer vision data, you can log kind of any statistical value you can think of in this format. But again, we're looking at language metrics today. We can see then we have distribution, max, mean, median, etc., min, quantiles, and we'll also have some other types here like is it a fractional, integer, etc. In this case, they're all strings because they're all responses and prompts. But we also have some cool ways, again, built into the open source library that you can build validators. And we'll see this kind of for a guardrail later, where you could say, if this is a specific type of object or a number or something, do X or, don't let this through. And then same thing with, you could be looking at like the max toxicity for a prompt or a set of prompts is a certain level, then maybe we don't let it through. Or jailbreak. Jailbreak's a great one, right? If the jailbreak level is very high, we think it's a jailbreak, don't even send that to our model. And we'll see how to stop that later as well when we build a guardrail. So I'm going to go through these other sections. I think there's a couple questions in the chat, but I'm going to go through a little bit here, get to a point where we can pause, and then I'll try to catch up to any questions. So here, let's create a quick little list of prompts. So here we have just 3. What is AI? Tell me a joke. Who won the World Series in 2021? And then here, we're going to just say, for each prompt inside of that set that we just created over there, go ahead and run our model, and then we're going to merge these profiles together. And we're using a function of ylogs to do that, where we initialize the first one with that schema, and then we're calling profile.track. This is now merging them together. So we're doing it on 3 different prompts and responses and kind of merging these profiles together. And this is going to give us something similar to like what we saw above, but now on 3 different prompts and responses. And again, takes a little bit here with our just running on a CPU time on Colab. But now we can see our cardinality estimate for prompts is 3. The reading level for 2 of them were actually the same. So our cardinality is 2. And then we have all those other metrics that we extracted here. And again, we'll see how to do cool stuff with this metric kind of in these next sections. But one powerful thing you do with them is monitor them over time and then see when something drastically changes. You might know that something's off. Or if you're doing prompt engineering, like I mentioned at the beginning, you could actually see, change your prompt, maybe not even actually deploy that new prompt and model to the user. Maybe you have the old one and you're kind of doing shadow deployment and you want to compare these models over time. You'd be logging metrics between all those different system prompts and see how they're changing over time. All right, so in order to do this next part with WhyLabs, and again, then we'll go more into our local environment and look at how to add a guardrail a little bit later in the notebook as well, just locally in your environment. We want to grab things from our 3 things from our WhyLabs account: the API token, the org ID, and the dataset or model ID. So again, if you haven't already, you can go to this link, create a free account. It should just take a few seconds. I think all you have to do is verify your email. There's no card or anything. Let me get you a better link. I forgot Colab does this now. No card or anything is needed to sign up. So again, just verify your email and you should be good to go. All right, so what we want to do is create a new project, get its project ID, get an access token from API token, and copy our org ID, which is on the same page. So let's go ahead and set that up. And we're just going to set them as environment variables here. Obviously, if you're actually building a MLOps pipeline in your environment, you might want to save these variables in a more secure or better way. But just for the Colab notebook, we're going to be setting them as a OS environment variable. So I'm going to go to my WhyLabs account, not the anonymous session. Once you sign in, you should have a page that looks something like this. And again, I'll go through this again if people need me to, but I'll go through it once and let me know if you have any questions. So I'm going to go ahead and from this homepage, go to create resource. And then I'm going to hit edit models and datasets. I'm going to actually go ahead and delete mine. So you might have a demo dataset in here or 2. You can delete them if you want. I have 3 in here, so I'm going to delete these old ones. Now I'm going to create a new one here. I'll call this Hugging Face. And resource type, I'm going to choose large language model. And I'm just going to hit add model or dataset. And now we have this new model. I'm going to take that model ID, copy it over to our notebook, paste it in here. Make sure that you don't accidentally catch any new spaces new lines or spaces in here. So you want this to just be a complete string like this. Now we want to go get our API key and org ID. Again, back in the WhyLabs platform. I'm just going to go to this tab here called Access Tokens. I'm going to create a new token. I'll just call it HF for Hugging Face. Create a token. You'll see it pops up here. I'm going to copy this, paste it in to our environment variable here. Go back, and on the same page, we have our org ID in a couple places. One right here, and then another one right here. So I'm going to copy that and paste it into my org ID placeholder. Once you have these in here, again, make sure you don't have any spaces or new line characters at the beginning or the end of these strings. Go ahead and hit Shift-Enter on this, and then that set our environment variables to our model number, our org ID, and our API key. So I'll give everyone a minute to do that because I know I went through it pretty fast. And if you have any questions, let me know. So again, you can hit Create New Resource. That'll take you to this model area. Type in a name. Select Large Language Model Type from Resource Type. Hit Add Model and Dataset, and I'll give you this model ID. Your ID should probably be much lower than mine. It'll be like 0, 1, or 2. And then from there, go to your access tokens, type in a name, create a new token, copy that token when it shows up, copy the org ID, and put those into those environment variable placeholders. And you can always get to this tab as well by going to Settings and Model and Dataset Management. So again, if somebody wants to let me know in the chat they did it, that wanted to follow along, that would be great. And let me see if there's any questions I didn't get to yet. It looks like someone from WhyLabs answered a question. So yeah, so someone said, is it possible to have all these metrics without sending proprietary data sets outside the company network? Yes. So the first part of the notebook, I'll just go to this one before I copied it. The only reason why the metrics, we were able to view them in WhyLabs in the first place when we were previewing them is because we did this WhyLabs anonymous session. You could just comment this out and everything here is locally and doesn't get sent anywhere. So far. The next part, we are going to send it to WhyLabs, but then we'll see how to also use those metrics just locally as well. Somebody gave a thumbs up, maybe to the answer. Someone said, are like Rogue and Blue metrics out of the box? Currently, they're not an out of the box metric here, but you can bring them for sure. So if you want to calculate those metrics, which are common in the NLP world, you can create your own function. And I'll actually go ahead and share this blog post if anyone wants to look at it. Here it creates how to create a user-defined function. That function can really do anything. And once you basically create this with a decorator, it creates a new column like we saw before, but with your defined metric. So it's really cool how flexible it is. And you should theoretically really be able to add any type of data that you want to collect. All right, so someone said they were able to do it. That might have been the thumbs up as well. You put in your org ID information and everything. So I'm going to keep going. If anyone has any questions, let me know, and maybe I can come back to this when we get to a good point. All right, so we're going to import WhyLabs Writer from WhyLogs. So this is going to allow us to create those profiles like we saw before that just contain those statistics around our LLMs. But then we're going to now write that up to WhyLabs, that we gave it our API key and our org ID and everything. And it's going to write to that project that we passed in the model ID to. So now let's go ahead and initialize our telemetry agent, which is the WhyLabs Writer. We're going to profile that prompt and response that we made above. So we'll see this a few more times. One, we're going to look at a whole bunch of data, see what that looks like, and then we'll actually create a little chatbot thing with Gradio that you can run and then kind of see what all the metrics look like that you're passing over, which should be fun. So then we call .write on that telemetry agent and pass in that profile. And if we go to the WhyLabs platform, I'm going to go home by clicking the WhyLabs logo. We have our Hugging Face model here. I'm going to click into it. We have a little summary tab. This gets more exciting when more data is coming in here. We can also go ahead and go to this inputs now. And let's scroll down and look at prompt sentiment is what we'll be looking at here. It's kind of easy to understand, but you could look at any of these other metrics as we go. It's just what I'm going to be focusing on here. We can see that we have 1 point of data now passed over because we wrote only one profile that contained that prompt and response for the dog question. And we have a sentiment score of pretty neutral, I guess. It's a little bit above 50, so it's fairly neutral. Someone said they keep getting an error skipping the upload. Like I mentioned, please ignore that error right now. That's a slight little bug on the WhyLog side. And it's only because we did that thing at the beginning where we initialized that anonymous session, and it's kind of looking for a name in there. Don't worry about that. Ignore that for the rest of the workshop. And hopefully, if you come back to this notebook, it should be gone very soon. So we wrote our first profile over. And if you did go back in the platform and you went to the Profiles tab, we have that single profile. Not much data in here right now because it's just one prompt and response. We could already see there's one insight from it. So it says the mean sentiment score of that for the response is really high, 98. So it's cool. You know, it's saying, hey, our response is very positive right now. Let's go back. And I'm just going to hang out on this prompt sentiment tab. And we'll go back to our notebook. So with this, you'll see this more in this backfilling section. I think it'll make more sense. But with this monitoring kind of over time, these statistics, you're able to use this to monitor for like LLM security, like we saw, our patterns coming out that you're monitoring for, prompt engineering experimentation, model performance changes on a set of prompts, shadow deployment, and kind of usage drift, like how people are using your model, or kind of monitoring in general. So we've seen that with like just looking at the profiles, and we saw just one point in our platform. Let's look at a lot more. This is where it gets way more interesting, in my opinion. So we have a prompt list here. I think this is 3 prompts for kind of 7 days, basically, is what we're simulating our model being in production for 7 days. So go ahead and run these code cells. We're going to import date time. And go ahead and run this, and I'll talk through what's going on here. And I actually initialized this twice. I think this should be fine. I should remove this one. We'll run this and see what happens. If something bad happens, comment this out, and we should be good to go. So we're creating a blank list here, and then we're basically just saying for each prompt in that list. Again, there's 7 lists in that list. So we're basically kind of simulating our model being in production for 7 days. We're going to initialize that telemetry agent like we did before. Then we're going to subtract a day. So this is where we're kind of able to view our data in a time series view now, instead of just all in one day, because for each item in the list, we're subtracting a day. By default, if you wrote it like we did up above, that's just going to be the date and time that you wrote it. But you are able to overwrite that date time by passing in the date time to the set date time stamp on the profile. So we're subtracting a day for each one of those. And then for each of those prompts in those days, we are running the GPT model function, and then we're getting that profile that contains those statistics that we've been seeing throughout the workshop. And then we're writing those up to WhyLabs. And this should just take a little bit. Again, we're running on just a CPU, and we saw that running the GPT model takes a few seconds per one. And while that's happening, I think, so I'll share these links again. Is anyone missing these links who wants them watching right now? The sign up link or the collab link? I know I've been sharing them in the chat. I'm not sure if they made it into the YouTube description like normal. Might try to add them in real quick. Does everyone have the link who wanted it? And okay, so this is running. I think it's almost done here. If we go back to our WhyLabs platform and we refresh this page that we were on, we can see that we're kind of getting this view over time now. In this case, we're looking at the prompt sentiment, but again, you could look on any of these metrics. So let's look at prompt sentiment here. And we're kind of seeing what a time series view looks like here, right? And already we can maybe guess just from the visualization. So we see, I often just like to look at the median sometimes and see how much that changes, just, for myself. I can see the median over here is 56. And let me zoom in if that's too small for you viewing. If you followed along, it should be easy for you to see. We can see median is 56 here, 38, 54. This day all of a sudden drops to negative, so maybe something happened here. And this day again is 62. So I'll zoom back out, refresh. I think our tab is done running there. So this is really cool. We can see kind of how in this case, how people are prompting over time. Again, we could also be looking at this for our responses. So let's go look at response sentiment and see what that looks like. It also looks very similar, actually, right? So a response in this case was, neutral or positive in most of these cases. And then all of a sudden on this day, it plummeted into a really negative area. And maybe we definitely don't want our chatbot ever potentially doing this, right? So let's set up a monitor, because this is great. We can visualize it, understand a little bit, in this case, how our responses are changing over time. But let's say I'm not looking at this every single day and I want to have an alert happen or trigger workflow in my pipeline when something happens like this. We can set up a monitor to do those things so we don't have to manually be looking at these all the time. So I'll go to Setup Monitors. And then we have a whole bunch of preset ones here that you can choose from that makes it really easy to set up. You can also create a new custom one with this button. And if you want, you can get really into it with a JSON configuration. So you can kind of set all the different thresholds or monitoring configurations that you'd want for all these different types of metrics or for your own custom metrics in here. But what I'm going to do is go ahead and hit configure on this data drift for inputs. And then we can see that we're monitoring our input column. And then I'm going to go ahead and make this a little less sensitive. So by default, we're using the Hellinger distance here to detect data drift. There's different ones you can select from if you hit a custom metric button. And here I'm going to make this a little less sensitive. So I'm going to say if the data, in this case, like if we keep looking at our prompt or response sentiment, if the sentiment dropped a lot, then trigger an alert and that or a workflow for us. And we don't have a reference profile, but we can also do, and I recommend this especially for like tabular data or something. If you have a training data set for your model, you can log that training data set as a reference profile and then compare these input values to that reference profile. It's a little bit different for LLMs. You might want to have like a golden set of prompts or expected usage, and you could compare it there. Or you can just do what we're doing today, which is looking at a rolling window. In this case, we're looking at the past 7 days. We're saying if anything drastically changed in those past 7 days against all those profiles, trigger an alert. But you could also do this for a longer period of time. So let's go ahead and hit save. And I'll go back to my input tab. Let's go back to this sentiment one. And by default, this is going to run every 24 hours, but you can also set this for different batch levels. So if you wanted to run this, for example, every hour and see if something drastic changed in that amount of time, you could do that. But we can also hit a preview. So we can hit preview now and see what it would detect when the monitor does run. And in this case, we can see we get this little chart above here that gives the drift distance for every single day. And on that day where it plummeted quite a bit, there was a pretty huge distribution shift there. And we had an alert trigger. And that would probably be the case, I'm guessing, for, oh, maybe we'd have to tune a little less for the sentiment one. Oh, maybe I didn't set up on the input, or the output is what that is instead of the input tab. But if we set up on output, we'd get the same thing. So now we have this trigger that happened. And again, you could do whatever you want with this, where that is triggering something in your workflow, or sending you a Slack message or an email or something like that. Someone said, assuming that since the metrics are calculated by LangKit and then sent to WhyLabs, none of the raw prompts and response data is sent to WhyLabs, right? Yes, I think there can be some cases where you can log frequent items, which might come up with, like, if you had a prompt that was often in there, that could be in there. But you can configure that so that wouldn't be the case. If it is on by default, I forget. But most of the time, yes. So you want to just extract these metrics and then log them up, and they don't contain your raw data. So again, we're doing this for LLMs today, but you could also imagine this for tabular data or image data, where you're just extracting some sort of metric and never passing any raw data to WhyLabs, which is why there's some industries that find that really useful, like healthcare or fintech are a couple that come up all the time. Which industry are you working on? Or is that definitely like a bonus for you that it doesn't track any raw data? Someone said they're getting an error on their side of the profile. So again, if you are getting this error, just please ignore this. It's kind of annoying, I know, but don't worry about it. It's not actually not doing anything. It's not harming us. And if you're getting a different error, chances are that you just missed a code cell. So if you want to, you could go scroll up and see if there's a code cell that you didn't run before. You can also always hit runtime, disconnect, and delete runtime and run all the code cells again. Just make sure you do them in the proper order. Yes, it said they're in fintech, and yes, it does sound like a good feature. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's like what we do at WhyLabs and WhyLogs, why we built the libraries this way, is because you don't really need raw data most of the time to detect when something like data drift is occurring, for example. Again, in LLMs or with tabular data or with image data, we have ways that kind of allow you to use these really privacy-preserving statistics and then monitor them. Yeah, so I think someone said they're just getting that no name error. Again, don't worry about it. It says it skipped upload, but it's lying to you, and that bug will be away very soon. All right, so I'm going to keep going. I know we're almost at, well, we are at the hour mark. I'm going to keep going. It's going to go a little bit over if you keep wanting to follow along. We're going to go pretty quickly through the next section. It's just setting a guardrail in your local environment, and we'll see how we can use these statistics to, oh, actually, first, let's go look at this Gradio section I forgot real quick, and then we'll look at the guardrail. All right, so let's go ahead and import Gradio. If you want to, again, I'll go through very quickly. You can go more play with this on your own is kind of what I'm hoping you do. I'm going to go back to my WhyLabs account. So we saw how to set up a monitor here. We can see what the data looks like over time. Really exciting. Let's see if you want to set up kind of a little chatbot and you could pass it prompts and see kind of the metrics it is extracting. This hopefully will be a fun way for you to do it. So create a resource, just like we did before. I would just call this HF2, Hugging Face 2. I'm going to capture my new model ID. So it should be one more than what your last one was. Mine's model 258. I'll paste it in. Again, making sure there's no extra space or anything there. Now this is going to write any data I generate here with this chatbot to that new model. So I'll go ahead and hit Shift Enter. It's going to run. And then I just recommend try out putting some positive stuff and negative stuff in here, or anything you want to see like what happens and what metrics are extracted and then how they're written over to WhyLabs. You can now do this in this little Gradio chatbot area. And there's a slider here. So this is going to say the number of days to subtract. So just like we went through that list before, now you can kind of simulate this being like in production for up to 7 days, where 0 would be today and 6 would be a week ago. So I could say like, hello, I love this product. Submit. And again, CPU, GPT-2 takes a little bit here. All right, so that logged, and let's go ahead and just log another one on, let's say 2 days ago. Let's say the same thing, actually. Love this product. Again, this is for you to play around with and kind of learn what metrics are being extracted here. And if you went over to WhyLabs now, go in this new model, look at our input tab. Oops. Let's see, did I do anything wrong here with my model setup? I did not select what type of model it is. That might be it. So I'm going to hit save. If that happens to you, you can always come back to edit here, select the type of model, and then go back to it. So if I go back, now we'll see that the inputs are being written over here. So again, you could be looking at just your prompts coming in. And we saw from those two, they're exactly the same. And then you could say, today on day 0, which is today, we'll say something really negative. And we'll say, you dumb and smell bad, which is really funny. This is like a little phrase that we found is like often considered highly toxic. But it's also, not really that offensive. So it's something we can show. So here we'll log this, and then that will come over here. Might take a second. Might take a second to write over from Colab. But anyway, this little section here is really fun for you to play around. And now you have a kind of a chatbot where you can change around which days you're writing to, submit text, and then kind of see what is being extracted. Someone said that's toxic. No way. It's funny. It's like it's really highly toxic. I think we'll see it again in a second when we add our guardrail. All right, so we can see, over time, this is just like a fun way of you being able to kind of set up a little chatbot inside your Colab environment here, and see which metrics are being extracted, and could be fun to kind of tune your model potentially. And again, you could swap out that GPT-2 that we created at the function up above with something like Llama, et cetera, if you're running this on your local environment. So let's keep moving. But you should totally come back and play with that when you kind of want to see what's going on. So let's set up a guardrail and some validation just in our local Python environment here. Again, we're going to import LangKit and metrics like we've seen before. We're going to set the pandas data frame so we can see all of it. We're going to initialize our text metric. And then here we're creating a function. I'm calling this function is not toxic. It's going to take a prompt message in. And then we're going to create a profile from that prompt using WhyLabs like we've seen before. We're going to convert that to a dictionary. We're going to call it a profile dictionary. And we're going to be looking specifically at that toxicity column, but you could adjust this column to be any of the other ones that we saw. So if you remember, we had like prompt toxicity, response dot whatever, jailbreaking, etc. And we're going to be looking at that. We're going to be getting all those statistics that we saw out of there. And then we're able to look at an individual element of that column. So if you remember, there was like category, cardinality, etc. And there was also distribution max. So in this case, we're just looking at one prompt. We're extracting, is it toxic or not? And we're getting the max score from that. And then we're going to print the score out here. And then we're saying if the toxic level is above 0.5, say, false, it's not or it is not toxic, so it is toxic, or return true. I mean, you could obviously adjust this number. So a toxic score in your actual application could be way higher than this. This is just an example of adding kind of a label to it very easily. So go ahead and run this. And then if we ran pass in, do you like fruit? We can see that this toxic score is very low here. So we're saying is not toxic is true. It is not toxic. And the score that was calculated is extremely low. And we'll use that phrase again, you dumb and smell bad. And we'll see that that's 96, very high toxicity. Now, we can use this in a little bit of an application. So we say, check the toxicity, basically. We're saying if is not toxic. So it's returning that true or false that we created. And if it's not toxic, then go ahead and get the prompt and response from our GPT model. And then we'll print it out. And then here, we'll do that again for a more toxic one, the you dumb and smell ad. And then very quickly, right, it saw that, oh, that's a toxic sentence. And you saw how quick it actually did that, profiling and getting those metrics and then setting the guardrail on it, basically. Incredibly quick. And right away, it just said, we're not even going to pass it to our model. We're saying as a large language model, ... which is kind of what all these companies are doing, right? So someone asked about what is a guardrail before. This is a pretty simple form of just one of it, where you're looking at toxicity. Again, you could be looking at jailbreak similarity. So if the score is really high and it looks like a jailbreak to you, you probably don't want to pass it to your model. Or maybe you do want to pass it to your model, see the response, but never actually give that response to the person querying it. So you might still want to have it actually happen so you understand what your model is doing. And this is just kind of a quick way of setting guardrails in your local environment, which I think is really cool. And any other things you can think about with those metrics extracted. So any other form of validator or something like that you want to set that isn't necessarily like a guardrail like this, you can do that by, you have all those extracted metrics, and then you can go ahead and do anything you can imagine with them, basically. And we also have a kind of a newer way, or a more defined way of doing this with, oops, I keep forgetting it does the Colab link right now, with LangKit validators. So you can go check out this blog post as well if you want to see some other ways of doing this. And then you can also add the custom metrics like I had mentioned. Let me get that blog post again. So if you want to add any custom metrics you think would be interesting for paying attention and monitoring your large language models, you could add them in here. And I'm always curious to know what those are. Like, what is it that people are finding interesting to monitor about their models? Definitely let us know, like in the Slack channel or something. I would definitely be curious about it. And then I won't run through this, but I just want to mention, optionally, you can use something called a rolling logger. So you might not want to be writing every single prompt or whatever all the time, like live. What you can do is use a rolling logger. So it's going to be consolidating all those prompts at an interval. And then write them at an interval. So like this is saying, someone could be prompting for 5 minutes in this case. And then after 5 minutes, it's going to write a profile of all those prompts up to WhyLabs instead. So I won't run this, but an optional way of setting up the writer. And then here are links to everything that you might find interesting after this, including some other intro to LangKit examples, a LangKit and LangChain integration notebook, the LangKit GitHub, WhyLogs GitHub. And then one thing I'll also share in the chat is if you're interested in getting let me get the actual link again. If you're interested in getting a promo code for more free usage of WhyLabs, just above the 2 free projects that are already in there, fill out this form and we'll get back to you. We'll also send that in the, I think the follow-up email as well. But I know some people are viewing here that maybe didn't register on Eventbrite. Definitely fill out that form. I'll share it on LinkedIn real quick as well. And with that, that's kind of the planned content I had for you today. I know there's still quite a few people here, so I'd love to know a little bit about your thoughts. Did you find this interesting? Does it seem like an interesting tool that you might be using in the future? Does it seem valuable? I know someone seemed really excited about the privacy preserving piece of it, which I think is really cool. Especially like I think they worked in fintech. So very common thing I hear from fintech and healthcare. So you don't want to be passing raw data out of your environment. But these statistical summaries are often fine. And I'll share a couple of the links again from the beginning if anyone else did just join in. There's the free sign up you can check out, and then the Colab notebook. And then I will also share the Slack channel again as well. Someone said, seems interesting, and they would give this tool a try. And I'd love to hear your feedback. So if you try it out, let us know in the Slack channel, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn too. Someone said, where do you learn about the definition of current metrics, aka toxicity? We should have some docs on that, but also the entire tool is open source. So if you want to see literally how anything is calculated, go to the GitHub. And it should be in there. And actually, if you go in, sorry, I forgot that wasn't my screen here. You can go to LangKit and go to docs. And then there's some features here. And so things like how these things are calculated are mentioned in there. But again, also you can look at literally all the code as well. So instead, how do we get the example of the Colab notebook? All right, so I'll share the link again. The Colab notebook, for anyone who just joined in and missed the link, is right here. After the stream, I will add it into YouTube description as well. So if you're watching this, oh, wait, someone said above links are diverting to WhyLabs page. This should be the link for the Colab notebook. If you're watching this later too, I will add the resources in the description so that if you come back to the recording, everything will be in the description as well. And the recording will be at the same link. So if you're watching on YouTube, come back to this link a little bit later if you want to rewatch anything, and all the resources will be added into the description. I also share the YouTube link on LinkedIn. If anyone on LinkedIn wants to go look at the YouTube link later, they can as well. So it sounds like it was interesting for a lot of people. Sounds like people thought it would be useful. I'm excited to see what people do with it. And so, we saw just kind of one use case today, monitoring sentiment in this case, but it could be any of those metrics. It could be a custom metric. What's really cool about this is, like I'd mentioned, A lot of people, when you're doing like system prompt engineering right now, you might be just kind of doing it at a whim and or on a gut feeling and seeing how it's performing sporadically. But with this, you could select any of these. Let's say you want to use some sort of response metric here again, or it could be a custom one, or it could be the one we calculate that's like the response relevancy. So like this relevance to prompt. I don't even know what this looks like for the GPT-2 model. Might be kind of all over the place. But for example, you could take this metric or any of those other metrics and, and then monitor over time on multiple system prompts. So you could say, okay, I think if I change my system prompt this way, the model's going to behave better, but I'm not 100% sure, or how do I measure that? Well, if you have a good metric here, you could change that prompt. Maybe it is the one you put in production, or maybe you have the current one still in production to users, but you could kind of do a shadow deployment of different prompt variations. So for example, maybe you have like 5 you want to try out, and then you try them out over a period of a few days or over a week, and you see, like this prompt version is definitely giving me more relevant responses, or the sentiment is way higher, whatever those metrics are that you want to calculate. You can monitor over time and then pick the one that really is performing the best on production data. Or it could be kind of research data if you want it as well. But I think that's going to be the future of probably changing prompts and prompt engineering, is doing it and then measuring it over time and then selecting the best one in that case. Potentially too, I mean, if you have this as a metric and this metric is working well for you, or your own custom one, you could, add in a workflow trigger or something where you could have maybe an LLM or GPT or something like that change the prompt for you. You could have a prompt, you could have prompt engineering doing prompt engineering, which would be interesting, and then measure this metric over time, and let's say like, yes, it is getting better, keep making it better. Awesome. Well, I see there's still quite a few people here, but I'm going to wrap up the stream. Unless anyone has any last minute questions, let me know in the chat. Otherwise, join the Slack channel. Again, I'll put the link in the description as well. So if you come back to this and you're watching this as a recording, everything should be in the description if it's not already there. No more last minute questions. I think I'm going to go ahead and end this stream again. Also, I know I've shared it before, but check out the open source project and give us a star again. We appreciate it. And hopefully I'll talk to some of you all later, whether that's on Slack or another workshop, which I do a whole bunch of different workshops almost every week. You can always find them on whylabs.ai/events. So I added a period there. So the next one next week is going to be an intro to AI observability. So we're going to cover some of what we did today, but it's going to be more on tabular data. And we'll talk more about like data drift and stuff. So if you haven't set up any ML monitoring before and you want to get started, not just in large language models, but in other types of data, that could be a good workshop to check out. And then in 2 weeks, on September 20th, I'm going to be doing a workshop on monitoring LLMs. Again, similar to what we saw today, but I'll be using OpenAI and LangChain. So we'll be using GPT 3.5 and LangChain, and then LangKit and WhyLabs. So again, very similar today, but we'll probably use also the LangChain callback that we actually have built for it, which makes it even easier. Hopefully this felt pretty easy. It's really just not that many lines of code to go from, extracting those metrics and monitoring your large language model. Right, it's only, we scroll down to that first WhyLabs writer. It's really only like you do the setup in 3 lines, import some stuff in 3 lines, create your metrics, and then it's just 3 lines of code here to actually write your profile or create the profile and write it to WhyLabs. And we reduce that down to like basically 1 line with the LangChain callback. Awesome. I see people saying thank you. Yeah, thank you everyone for coming out. I always love teaching workshops, and hopefully some of this was very new to you and hopefully exciting, and maybe it got you thinking about how you might want to monitor the success of your large language models, or potentially, what issues could happen. And hopefully I'll talk to some of you all later. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the stream now. Everyone have a good rest of your day.